And we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. I'm Lockie and with me is Ryan. And the Abstractable Podcast is for curious people that want to learn. I'm going to mix it up a little bit this week. I'm going to say that it's also about building a really strong mental network with ideas from books and other interesting things. In this episode, we talk about the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Ries and Jack Trout.
And what do we talk about? We talk about what the point of marketing is, how perception and reality are wildly different things, the law of the ladder, and about knowing which rung of that ladder you sit on, and why it's so important to call out all the elephants in the room. So why? Why would you want to read this? We all have a brand, even if we aren't running a business or a CEO or in the marketing department. And because understanding human nature is essential to good marketing. So you can find out more about the author Ries at ries.com, and you can find a free copy of the book at archive.org. Don't forget, you can also find full video from our episodes on YouTube for those wanting to see a bit of visual entertainment. And you can stay in contact with us through our show notes for every episode via our Instagram page. We hope you enjoy the episode. And we're back.
Oh,
in sync. Look
nice.
at that.
Do you think it's a bit weird that we say we're back in the intro and then say we're back when the episode starts?
No, we're just always back. We're back to back.
Yeah. It's probably a discussion we should have had off mic, but we like to let people inside the tent.
See what's going on in the inner workings.
To show how little we actually know.
And so talking about how little we know, another topic that we're delving into today, marketing.
Yeah, that's it. It's a good one that we need to learn a bit more about. So the book is The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, which is a really good book. It's kind of short, snappy. You can tell it was written in the 90s or 80s, or I think it was 90s, wasn't it?
Yeah, early 90s.
But nonetheless, it was a really good read. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, and it was done by two titans of the marketing industry, Ries and Jack Trout. These guys, Al is still going strong. I believe he's 94 years of age and still working full time. And I think he looks about 75, if that kind of gauges. So he's one of those troopers. He's like a Buffett or a Munger. Just keeps going.
Yeah, okay. Jack Trout is a good name too.
It's a great name. Unfortunately, Jack is he's passed away, but in 2017. So, but he was still a modest 82 years of age. So,
yeah, he had a good run.
Yeah. Well, on that, let's have a quick chat about maybe Alan and Jack, and then we can get stuck in, mate.
Yeah, tell us about their lives.
So, as I said, starting with Al, he was born in 1926. He majored in maths and graduated in 1950. Like, that's a long time ago.
That is a long time ago.
And it's interesting. There we go. That's the first of the episode.
That's $1.
And he majored in math, and there's been some very fascinating math majors coming out of the woodworks across many different industries. And I'm just wondering whether there's something there in majoring in maths and going on to do some other crazy things.
Not wanting to do maths after that.
and never
like
wanting to touch a maths
after we've done a maths course. Yeah. Look, yeah, I think that's like law. Like a lot of people in entertainment did law degrees, and I just wonder whether people are humanities focused and didn't know what else to do. But maths is such an in-depth thing. It seems hard to imagine going through that and then, doing something different. But I guess it's a very theoretical field. Unless you're an engineer and you're using applied mathematics, you're really kind of in academia, right?
Yeah, that's the thing is once you've done it is to get out of it. So I don't know if that's a paradox because I suspect most people going into a maths major are pretty invested in maths itself. So maybe you get worn down enough that you decide you want to do something else. But I know that Naval Ravikant, which is one of our previous episodes, he gets asked all the time, what is one of the skills you would learn or go back and learn? And maths is the thing that crops up every time he's asked.
It's not for me.
No, I was almost done with it in engineering. Although I don't mind how some of the things can apply out in the real world, but you got to know what you got to really know the weeds. It gets far too complicated.
No, I think we've established I'm not a details person. So how I got through those courses, I don't know. But
this is why you do those courses with friends. You get their answers.
Yeah, exactly. Bit of help from a few mates. But look, Al definitely ditched maths.
Yeah, so he did join General Electric, their advertising department, straight out. And he eventually founded his own advertising agency in New York City in 1961. So that was 11 years out of...
That's right.
Yeah, nice and early.
That's right in the Don Draper zone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 1967, Jack Trout joined in with his agency. So this is where these guys obviously started working professionally together. And then they together in their partnership co-authored some revolutionary articles, which are pretty famous in the marketing world, I believe, in advertising age. And that was in 1972. And 1996, they started working, Al started working with his daughter, Laura Ries, at their company called Ries. And that has been going ever since. And they've got a pretty groovy website, mate. You should check it out.
Yeah, I'll check it out. That sounds good.
In 2016, he was inducted into the Marketing Hall of Fame. So he's a big player.
Damn right.
Jack, as I mentioned, sadly he passed away, but he was born in Manhattan. And he also started out at GE. So maybe these two actually probably cross paths somewhere there, although it's a massive company. So
and back then it was just as big.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Then he became a divisional manager at Uniroyal and eventually founded Trout and Partners, which is his own marketing firm. His clients have included Apple, Citicorp, GE, HP, IBM, Procter & Gamble, Xerox, and many, many others.
God, that's huge.
Yeah, he's got some big players in there. And like some of them are just the big corporates, but Apple's in there too, which is a kind of separates from the rest of that group, I believe.
Yeah, I wonder if that was during the Steve Jobs hiatus or after he came back.
That's very fascinating. I wonder.
Oh, I see what you did there. You were going to say interesting, and you bloody changed it.
Hey, if we need to bar the word fascinating at some point in time, we can. But for now, it's fresh, so we're allowed to use it.
What other synonyms have you got sitting on your computer screen there?
Mate, never you mind. So he's got some big names in there, but he's obviously gone for such a long time that these companies have been around for such a long time that he could have been in there at any point during that history. So I don't know. Through the 2000s, he worked at the US Department of State on America's global image and public opinion as a result of the Iraq War.
Yeah, that's a pretty tough assignment.
Yeah, I think so. And I don't know how you. Yeah, I don't know how you deal with that. It's a very politically charged conversation. Just to start.
Well, it only got better when they elected Obama, but I can't say it's too good at the moment. But
And he's written.
That's it. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Thanks for that commentary. No. He's written 16 books, 5 with Ries, and they work together in their partnership for 26 years. So
that's awesome. I'm fascinated by these long partnerships, It seems like something that, if you find someone you click with and you can make the relationship kind of work, you can do some great work together. 26 years. Bloody hell.
Well, I think it gets at the crux of it. It comes down to trust. And there's this trust bond that forms that how someone that you've been in partnership with for 25 years, you know all their intricacies, how they behave, and you can almost rely on one another. There's something there in that trust element.
Yeah. It seems like a lot of them, they kind of go do their own thing and come back together. I think that's probably important too. They've got a bit of freedom. It's not a marriage. Well, a monogamous one.
They're pretty progressive in that way. So the 5 books they've done together: Positioning, The Battle of Your Mind. That was 1981. They've done Marketing Warfare, Bottom-Up Marketing, Find a Horse to Ride, and the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing, which is this book. And it's actually available for free for anyone that wants to check it out. It's on archive.org, which is a pretty handy database for it's like a Wikipedia, just full of free stuff.
Is it? What else is on there?
I'm not paid by them either. So that's free advertising.
Jeez, you are generous. What like, is it books or just?
They have books, videos. It's one of those kind of free internet mission orientated companies. There's a couple of them getting around. Like Wikipedia is the most famous version of it.
What's that?
Like a mission. So,
all right.
They want to make things free for people, so people don't have to pay for them.
No, it's awesome. I'll definitely check
it's
that
not
out.
Pirate Bay.
It's not that kind of free.
Yeah. So
is that still going?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, I think so. My friend told me.
Yeah. My neighbour told me.
Yeah, a mate of mine. Yeah.
We actually, now that I'm burying myself in a hole, we actually, because we're in France at the moment, which we've probably highlighted every single episode, and we were staying in an Airbnb when we first arrived, and it was one of those shared Airbnbs. It wasn't, one that you have by yourself, and the host had the largest Blu-ray movie collection that I've ever seen.
Wow.
And they weren't actually DVDs. They're all on his files that he's obviously, that he's obviously ripped straight off his DVD collection that he just didn't show us. So we,
of course.
And I think that bloke used quite a bit of bandwidth. So anyway.
Very good. And what's his address?
Haven't got that much.
Yeah.
I've forgotten about
that. We'll remain anonymous. So, I mean, there's things that are a bit outdated in this book, but there's some good stuff in it. Like, I love the examples they use, and some of them haven't borne out quite what they thought they would, because you can't predict the future, but there's a lot in there, and it's also multivariate, so you're never going to really be able to fully, I don't know, like, say this is the reason for that, or that sort of thing.
There's that rule that's just because you haven't seen an instance of something doesn't mean it can't happen. It's a very Black Swan-y type thing. And so just because all you've seen throughout history has been this example doesn't mean that it's a hard fixed rule. Doesn't mean there won't be exceptions. And so I think...
Is that like the exception that proves the rule? Well, I never understood that saying.
Well, I think people have just done that to get away with making up as many rules as they want.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, right. Okay. So
Like,
we both don't know.
Yeah. So, well, what's the English language? Probably has more exceptions than there are rules in the thing.
Is that coming from a newly adopted Frenchman?
No, it's coming from all the pain that I've heard from anyone else trying to learn English.
Yeah.
I feel for him. So
Seriously.
but you're right. Not taking away from the massive value in this book. It was, it was written 30 years ago, so that's a fair while. And I don't know. I felt that there was some conflicting stuff throughout, even in their own piece to some degree. Like, they spoke about never predict things, and then they made some wild predictions, and some were right, some were wrong. Great. That's almost the case with anyone that makes predictions. And it also felt like that some of the rules, which we'll get into, conflicted with, to some degree, some of their own other rules.
Interesting. So, dial up. So but is that a lack of nuanced understanding from us, perhaps?
Possibly. It was also written in an age that was very outbound focused, which is about getting your message out there, kind of pushing your message. This is us, come buy our stuff, as opposed to focusing on that inbound, which is where the marketing is certainly shifted over the past decade or years.
It's like the fact. Yeah, the fact you used to just broadcast your message as much as possible and ram it down people's throats. That, I think the consumer has gotten a little smarter than that, because they've just had overexposure to that type of marketing, and that tactic, or perhaps you'd call it a strategy, doesn't work as well. And then that's where the guys like Yvon Chouinard and Patagonia's and even to an extent maybe you'd say Richard Branson's and those guys have kind of gone at it a bit of a different way and succeeded through the 2000s. Even though they were arguably successful before then, their type of marketing is kind of, really moved forward a lot more than the Campbell's soup ads 40 times a day. And so, brands can no longer just rely on pure exposure to win.
Yeah.
Though it's helpful. But
it's you almost have a separation of the brand itself from the products itself to some degree, in that the brand is continually building and radiating in energy over time, which is that Branson brand, as you said, versus throwing out the Campbell's soup product itself. I wonder if Branson could sell Campbell's soup.
Well, I mean, they got a pretty good boost from Andy Warhol, so maybe that was the most genius marketing move ever from Andy or whoever came up with it. But
I think that was Andy's.
Campbell's soup. I think him. So
I think that was Andy's marketing move, not necessarily Campbell's.
Oh, definitely. I mean, be interesting to check that, but I'm pretty sure it was all him.
And I guess at the end of the day, mate, it comes down to that. What is the point of marketing?
Well, yeah, and this is the overarching message of the whole book, I think, is that they call it the law of perception. They've got 22 laws, as is in the title, but we'll go through some of the major themes and some of the ones that we think, I suppose, represent some of the others. But, that they're fundamentally saying that the marketing is a battle of perception. And to take that to the next level, perception is your reality. So when you're making a purchasing choice, there's a lot of different factors that go into that, but it is your perception that will make that choice. And so they say most marketing mistakes stem from the assumption that you're fighting a product battle rooted in reality, but that's not actually the case. you're fighting a battle of perception and how your product is perceived. And, positioning is kind of the second part of that we'll get into. But essentially, it's kind of about trying to figure out how your product is perceived by your consumers or customers. It's not really about how many RPMs your Karcher washer does or whatever. Yeah, that is not a good example, but it's not about the nuts and bolts of the product as much as we like to think.
Maybe a classic example would be, I'm sure there's maybe less so now, but certainly going back years ago when it was just NASA in the space race program, there was some of the big state-run space race programs. There would have been plenty of stuff that was getting used to build space products that were totally applicable across, maybe auto manufacturing or infrastructure or who knows. I'm sure some consumer goods, but they weren't kind of marketed in that fashion. People didn't see them as being relevant to that particular industry. Who knows? Maybe it helps you with getting better display on your television or something. There's some technology that they're using. And so the point is, it's not just individuals that have their own perception. It's like industries have their own perception, and there are all these paradigms and perspectives as to how things fit together. But at the end of the day, it's human nature.
And wrapped up in human nature is status and what you want for yourself and what you're actually buying something for. But I guess their point is that they say only by studying how perceptions are formed in the mind and focusing your marketing programs on those perceptions can you overcome your basically incorrect marketing instincts. Yeah.
Their big thing is that it's not just about having the absolute best product. That's only part of the equation.
No, that's right. Exactly.
So you're a needed man, mate.
Yeah, my phone's ringing.
So
tell us about the law of the mind, the rule of the mind.
So this is about not necessarily being first in the marketplace, which is that first mover advantage that you hear about these days. It's about being first in the mind of the consumer. So this is all premised on the idea that, and it flows very much from the law of perception. So people's realities are formed, and then in the author's opinions, people's minds don't change. And there's probably a lot of truth in this. It's not to say that people don't change, but people's perceptions do become more and more rigid. So, for example, Xerox were the first in copiers. Now, there's a lot of old examples littered throughout this book.
It's one of the nice things about the book, how aged the actual examples are.
It's almost this nostalgia.
Particularly when they're talking about computers.
Yeah,
it's awesome. You're like, oh, that's cute.
I think the Apple II gets a mention in here. It's coming out. I know they rag on Next, and saying that it was going to be an absolute failure or whatever. Little did they know.
Arguably, that's true.
Well, is it?
I think so. I don't think it was a roaring success.
What's your phone at the moment, mate? Do you know your entire phone and every app that you use is based around Next's operating system? Object-oriented programming?
Wow, interesting. So you're talking about the function of the product, and I'm talking about the marketing in this instance, is that commercially it was not a success, and that he sold it to Apple. It was a bit of a Hail Mary at the time. and that he really kind of missed his market. And I think that's probably the point they're trying to make. However, from what you're saying, there was a lot of great technology that they built about it. So certainly had value, but the value that he intended, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I guess now it did lead on when Jobs jumped back into Apple. He brought all that technology from Next into Apple, and that basically wiped out their entire range and replaced it with everything that Next was doing. And that's what eventually led to some of their massive breakthroughs, like the App Store and everything else. So, which is fascinating. But you're, talking about Next as the company, whilst it did sell for a pretty hefty sum to Apple, it might have been a fire sale to some degree.
Don't know.
And so,
something to look more into. I'd love to do the Walter Isaacson thing, biography on here. That'd be fantastic. Another one talking about NASA, there's a good biography on Elon Musk too. That's probably a little dated now, but that's a terrific book as well, that could get a run here at some point.
You give it a qualifier?
It's about Ashley Vance. It's by Ashley Vance. And I don't think I'm going to give it a qualifier. I just think it's a good book.
Okay. Well, let's keep those ones on the radar. So Xerox, before we get too nostalgic, they were the first in copiers, and they tried to go into the computer business, and 25 years and $2 billion later, Xerox was nowhere in computers. So they've still got a pretty long time horizon that they're looking at. So the point was that Xerox had been established and Xerox had been known as a particular, product or company. And that's what people knew them for, and that's what people went to them for. They didn't go to Xerox for computers. And arguably, what is Xerox used for now? I know them in printing and photocopiers.
It's basically photocopiers, as far as I know. So their point kind of holds with that.
Yeah, and so once a mind is made up, it is rarely ever changes. And I was thinking about this, like one personal brand example, I think is maybe Tim Ferriss. And Tim Ferriss is always, for me, has always been this like self-help, productivity, weird experiment type guy. And seeing him, or seemingly noticing him trying to maybe shift gears slightly over the last couple of years has been really interesting. And I think a lot of people probably still just go to him for exactly what he's known for. Very fascinating. But for me, he'll always be known as like the guy that does real productivity hacks and the weird experiments and things.
Yeah, it's interesting. He's definitely that way in my mind, for sure.
Yeah, exceptional nonetheless, but
Absolutely. I suppose this kind of goes into the idea that, okay, if you get burnt into the mind as something, well, then you need to create a new category for yourself that you can be number one in. And this is the thing that they describe as the law of category or positioning. So kind of flows out from those. It's like, okay, there's room if you think of what, and I guess it's kind of a little bit of a thinking fast and slow thing. You've got like this kind of type 1 sort of, reaction to things, an instantaneous link. And so if you think photocopy is Xerox, then, or vacuum cleaner, Hoover, back in the day, probably when this was written, then you can't be a vacuum cleaner company and want to win the idea of vacuum cleaner. No, you need to actually change your category and position yourself as something else, because people don't necessarily buy the product. So in that instance, you may want to change your positioning to be the most high-tech vacuum cleaner, and then you're James Dyson. And so you can create further and further and further niches of positioning your product in different areas. And I think there's some real genius in this. And it flows into another law, the law of the ladder. But essentially, people buy products for numerous different reasons, and it's often not the case that it's related to cost. And it's also not the case that the price is generally related to cost. So if you're buying a Louis Vuitton handbag, you're paying, thousands more than the actual cost price of making that item. But you're not buying the physical bag, you're buying the status that comes with that bag.
I was going to say, this is where you get into that real space around like Rene Girard and memetics and tribes, and so people wanting to belong to a particular clique or a particular tribe, and which is driven by this idea of memetics, which was coined by Rene Girard, and that people just mimic one another, and you see these trends of mimicry almost give rise to different opportunities for new companies or new products or new things that come about.
So I think like maybe clothing's such a fantastic example of this, because if you really just wanted a shirt, you can get a shirt for very, very cheap, If you wanted the utilitarian function of a shirt, you can get them anywhere. But you can buy thousands of different brands and types and shirts, and some you want to buy them because they are expensive. Maybe you're buying a gift and it's important that you spend a certain amount of money just on something. So you might actually want the price to be high. That might be part of its value, that it's expensive. And the handbag can be part of that. Or it may be that the look makes you look like your favorite surfer. And so you're in that tribe, you're a surfy tribe. Or you may want something that's super functional, got lots of pockets because you want to be seen as handy. And it's all these kind of strange and wonderful things that go on in our heads that are different positions for the same item. And so the law of the ladder, which is kind of their next one, kind of talks about your position in the market against the leader, I suppose. And you should kind of adjust your strategy depending on your position in the market. So if you're the market leader, you want to act a certain way. But if you're second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth, it's generally not advised to try and look like the leader because they've already got that position. You actually want to make yourself look different to them and differentiate yourself so that you're having a new position and admitting that you're not the top dog, but saying and this is Seth Godin kind of stuff where he's like, people like us do things like this. And so you say, well, if you want to go and buy the top brand of, soup, well, that's for you. But if you care about the earth and you like organic soup, then you're like us and you should buy this soup because it's a little more exclusive. Not everyone's going to turn up with this one in the lunchroom. And when someone asks you about it, you can say, oh, well, this is organic soup. And that has whole newer connotations. And there's this, you can divide a market according to them as many times as you want, hundreds, into tiny segments with tiny, tiny target markets. You can make a lot of money that way.
Have you, mate, been seeing, or have you seen any of those advertisements for that? I'm not so much at the moment, but certainly going back a few months, that Seed brand. There's like I think it's Seed. It's like a probiotic or something.
No, I haven't. I must not be on the algorithm for that one based off my food purchases.
Interesting. So there was
Probably will come up now.
Yeah, well, now that we've had a conversation about it, your phone's probably picked it up.
Yeah.
So I hope I've actually got the name right. I think it's Seed, and it's basically just this probiotic, but it's like the ultimate example of recognizing their position and understanding marketing. So they may not be the best probiotic on the market by any stretch of the imagination, but they basically market it up in this like little cylinder of, it's really nicely colored, natural green looking cylinder. And, you get your probiotics and you can take them with you wherever you want. And you got to have your daily seed. And, it started this massive movement of people jumping on to start having probiotics and things, which is phenomenal. It's
amazing.
It's a good thing. I don't know much about their product and how good it is, but if people are doing that, that's great. But it has worked so well for them.
Wow,
that they've actually created this movement.
That's it. I mean, there's already probiotics. I mean, if you wanted an example why this is true, like bottled water, like far out.
Thank you.
Incredible.
Thank you. Have you read chapter 1?
The book. Is that a book? No, I haven't.
Yeah. No, it's not chapter 1 of this book. It's chapter 1 of the book.
I thought you were quizzing me like, have I read this book? I'm like, yeah, I've read this book.
What are you talking
about it for 20 minutes? Otherwise, I'm a pretty good bullshit artist.
you know your marketing, mate.
I got defensive early and I should have just listened.
Caught you out. We caught out that you haven't read chapter 1 of this book. So chapter 1 is written, it's like the initial biography. It's like, this is chapter 1 of thank you. Because thank you went into name. Thank you Australia. And I reckon those guys have, again, another good example of nailing their market.
They're awesome.
And they're doing some great work too. So, but their whole thing was just centered around bottled water. And what they did is they coupled the bottled water with a social, massive social good, and that segmented them in the market of bottled water. And from there, they've just exploded into everything else.
Yeah. I mean, what a great idea. There was nothing for a person who wanted to buy ethically in these areas that really stood out.
So this really ties into the next bit, right? Which is this idea around the law of line extension.
Yeah, so this not confused me, but I haven't quite worked it out in my head. So the idea, what they say is that when isn't it right to leverage a brand is essentially what this is about. So the law of line extension is don't extend your brand into something new because it devalues the positioning of it essentially. So if you make Ferraris, don't go and make Ferrari motorcycles or Ferrari. Well, that's probably not true. Let me rephrase that. If you make Ferraris, don't go and make Ferrari shoes.
I think they're both things. I feel like Ferrari shoes are a thing. I'm sure.
So do I. I think they are. But what these guys are saying are, don't do that. It devalues your brand. And they kind of talk about it probably more in the fact they give an example, again, nice old school example, but they say marketing is a battle for perception, not product. In the mind, for example, A1 sauce is not the brand name, it's the steak sauce itself. So if you're Vegemite, don't go and release a juice and say, well, Vegemite's really popular. So Vegemite's really popular. So let's we should use that brand name and the trust we've built too. But no, you're actually devaluing your positioning there and confusing. But there's lots of notable examples. Perhaps that Ferrari one's one straight away. I've seen Ferrari reading glasses. And then you talk about, say, Virgin, Apple, those sort of things. So there is obviously a place where you do want to extend your line, but where is that and why would you, and why wouldn't you, do you think?
I wouldn't see Apple ever where Apple currently is, for example. I wouldn't see Apple ever making Apple sunglasses. You know, that's not their brand. That's not what they are.
Yeah,
which
but
is interesting.
It's hard to define why, because they're a super. I guess maybe it comes back to your positioning in the first place. So
it almost seems like you need, as important as it is to know your position is based on knowing your customers. Who is your segment? Who are the people that are your true fans? Not the ones that might buy your product on occasion, but the ones that religiously go out and buy you, time and time again. Who are these people? And that's who you're tapping into in conjunction with your positioning in the market.
So, well, perhaps, okay. Yeah, okay. So, for example, Virgin, so they were known for being kind of disruptive before tech disruption, They disrupted the record sale market. Then they made this label, Virgin Records, and that was, free-spirited, tapped a little bit into the hippie movement back then. And then they started an airline. Now, that's a big brand extension, but what old Branson did seemed to be that he took the fun with it, and he kind of figured out that was his brand, I think. That was his position, was that I make things that are boring fun or something.
They were the
so
rebels.
Perhaps that's why it worked.
Yeah, they were the rebels, like the rebels, the free-spirited ones, and that was what Virgin was known as. And so that is how they apply it.
So perhaps like Apple's known to be beautifully simple tech innovation, perhaps, in my mind. So if they were to bring out a pair of glasses that were somehow like had technology in them and were so nicely designed and simplistic that maybe you would buy them. I mean, they've got a watch. Did you think they'd have a watch?
No, and that's fascinating. Maybe, but we saw that Google tried to go into glasses, so maybe glasses are the next wearable that becomes tackled by the tech market. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's like you've got to kind of know your brand identity, and then you can move in. Like Dyson can make really awesome hand dryers because they've done the same thing to hand dryers that they did to vacuum cleaners, which is make them something that was kind of annoying, really bloody awesome, and way better and more futuristic.
Yeah, it's almost like anything in the high-tech air market at a consumer level, we've got it. That's like Dyson,
Have you ever seen the wheelbarrow he invented?
No.
So James Dyson's first invention was a wheelbarrow, and you can Google it. It's called the ball barrow, and you can kind of see his signature in it. Like it's a little bit out there. It didn't take off, and it's a weird looking thing. But you can buy one off Gumtree if people have got them lying around. And then he went into and invented these revolutionary vacuum cleaners.
So what? Just briefly explain to me what this is, because I haven't got it in front of me.
Basically, instead of like a wheelbarrow, you've got a normal wheel like you would a car wheel. It looks like that. Imagine that wheel is replaced by a medicine ball. That's the design.
Does that mean you've got like full 360 like direction?
No, it's still kind of connected by an axle, but it's like a blow up medicine ball that's so the wheel's a lot wider. And the idea was, I believe that, it's got a lot more sort of, it doesn't tip as easy, and I don't know, I don't think it really works, but that was his first foray. It's kind of a cool little anecdote.
I think maybe maybe it does tie into his bigger brand. Maybe he was trying to like tap into the nuance of the wheelbarrow and how he can innovate it. And maybe that's what he did in the vacuum and hair drying and hand drying spaces subsequently.
Yeah. Interesting. But it doesn't quite fit, does it? Because I don't think it's electronic. I think he needs to stick to those, which he has. But so maybe that's what this is. The law of line extension is like, don't give up your position and what you're known for through extension.
Yeah, I like that. Dyson has this, like, there is definitely a fashion element there now, similar to what Apple is. Apple is a fashion brand. They don't have necessarily the best tech or whatever. They've got the tech as well, which is founded on their patents. So they're bringing almost like space age technology to the consumer, in a nice way.
Yeah, they make the boring sexy.
Yeah, and so what you're saying is don't build a wheelbarrow because that doesn't fit within that schema,
Yes. Yeah.
And that's not where it lies. So I think this is about what this means is that in identifying that, you can't go into wheelbarrows or you can't go into building a hammer or maybe some shorts or something as Dyson, right? And what you're doing there is you're sacrificing. And so this is the law of where the law of sacrifice comes in. And this is really about defining your authentic persona. Now, in doing this sacrifice, it works in a quite a funny way because you're building this persona around the brand itself, and that doesn't necessarily mean that who that persona is as the brand. Let's say that I'll talk about an example in a second, but it doesn't necessarily mean that persona is who your target market will be, if that makes sense. So let's talk about
go through the first part and then the second part. I think is an interesting follow-up point.
Yeah. So let's talk about smoking, and this is one of the examples.
Classic 90s example.
Yeah, this is such a good example. In an age when most smokers were men, cigarette manufacturers wanted to broaden their market. The idea was, we got the men, let's go out and get the women too. And so Philip Morris, what did they do? They narrowed the focus to men only. And then it narrowed the focus even more to the man's man, the cowboy. The brand was called Marlboro. And today, which was 1993, Marlboro was the largest selling cigarette in the world. In the United States, Marlboro was the largest selling cigarette among men and women too. So they created this like image of the cowboy, the cowboy having a smoke. And so the cowboy was the persona of the cigarette brand itself. And so people wanted to feel like, the elements of a cowboy. They wanted to feel a little bit like a cowboy. Wayne. Like John Wayne, yeah. And so this, again, we're coming back to Apple again, but Apple had a great example of this in their Think Different campaign when they, kind of relaunched back in the mid-90s or whenever it was. And, where they had the big poster, just like a Muhammad Ali, and that's it on the poster, and, it's Think Different, or, Gandhi or any other famous group of people that they kind of got on these posters. And that was kind of like this inspiration, if you want to be an inspiring person, if you want to be a different, act in a different way, use Apple is kind of the premise behind it. And so that doesn't just get the Gandhis of the world onto Apple. That isn't who they are, or the Muhammad Alis of the world onto Apple. It gets everyone who wants to appear or feel or look like them, or show the traits of them.
Yeah, it gives you a bit of FOMO, like, if it says, because this is Seth Godin says, with a tribe, there's insiders and there's outsiders. And so if this is strongly targeted at a certain group, there can be a bunch of people who also want to identify with that trait who aren't necessarily in that group, and so that can seemingly attract not just the people it's directly marketed to, it's got this flow-on effect too. But you can't really have a message if you're for everyone. If you're for everyone, you're for no one. And I think that's what they're kind of saying, is that you need to sacrifice certain parts of the market so that you can hone in on one message. And you'll probably end up getting a lot of those other people who aren't being marketed to as well. Or you won't. And if you don't, you'll be even more fanatically followed by the people who are in your market. If there's a lot of haters, then the people that like you will be true fans.
Yeah.
So you can see this in perhaps politically, this is so true, I think that's where my mind goes, something like, say, Breitbart News or something. Most people hate them. The people that really like them are fanatical about it.
Yeah. I think there's a few news companies that fit within that regime.
Yeah.
For sure. And it's, and then it becomes the politically charged perspective, I'm just thinking here, like, Fox and CNN, those type of news outlets, and you're on one side or the other. But it doesn't, just because you're sacrificing traits, or just because you're sacrificing, part of your persona, doesn't mean that people don't want to kind of fall into that from time to time, or don't want to feel like that from time to time,
Yeah.
And so Harley Davidson's a great example. Tesla is probably a great example of some other companies doing this well.
So you can't really fake this though, or you can, but it doesn't work as well, does it? Like, a Harley is obviously people are fanatical about Harley Davidsons, but they are who they are. They're not pretending. They're not pretending to be somewhere they're not. And I think that their law of candor was another one of their laws, and that plays into that, doesn't it? So they're all linked together quite cleverly.
Yeah, it's about being authentic to who you actually are. So what happens is with that authenticity is like an intensity. And you mentioned earlier in the positioning space is you start to burn your way into the minds. And this is the law of focus that they speak about in the book. And so the example they use is Federal Express. Now, Federal Express is quite big, although they've taken a slump over the recent, I think, couple of years, not just as a result of COVID, but the last couple of years. But back when they became a hit sensation, they were able to put the word overnight, just that word overnight, into the minds of people, and that revolutionized the entire logistics operation. They made things happen. They're about the quality of making your package be delivered in one night. You could expect it the next day, and that wasn't around back then. Now, they actually also point to Federal Express as kind of diluting their brand when they expanded globally. What we spoke about earlier, and I actually think that it's great. It's great talking about this in hindsight, by the way. So I think around 93, the stock price of FedEx was quite down. I think it was, it reduced by like 50% from where it was since before they'd gone global. But you look at them, a couple of years later, and the share price has doubled from where it was. So I just don't think they gave enough time to allowing the Federal Express brand, the persona of Federal Express, catch up as a result of that, that big brand move they made. So some other examples. I think what's really important here is the wherever you focus on. So overnight was Federal Express's focus. It needs to be a category that's actually available, which ties into the positioning conversation. So it's focus on one, just a one word or a couple of word attribute, describer, and that's what you are. That's what you focus on. So in the car world, Mercedes was engineering, and BMW was driving, and Volvo was safety.
Mm-hmm. I think the Volvo one's particularly clever.
Yeah. Do you think it's worked for them?
Definitely. 100%.
See, I recall back, it was definitely, I'm sure it was the 90s. Those were the Volvo ads, and Volvos were essentially known as a piece of shit, weren't they? Except they were super safe.
I think it was like, it's ugly, but we're not selling you a beautiful car. That was their position. It's like, this thing's safe. So if you want your kids to get to soccer, get this car, And I bet you they sold a lot of cars.
Yeah,
I think they've gone more luxury now. I mean, they're really nice vehicles, but I think it's very clever.
Yeah, it's seemingly diluted somewhat now from where it was originally, but they were very ugly cars. They were just
it's an interesting thing to kind of point out that I was like, this car sucks. Like I hated this car, but it wasn't for me. So
you weren't a family man back in the 90s, mate.
No, they don't care about me. They don't want to get me. They want to get someone completely different. And so that probably is a good sign that it's working. If they're successful and you don't like it, it probably means they've found someone else and are really honing in on that market because they're causing a feeling in you, one way or the other.
Yeah, and I think in choosing the attribute, there needs to be this perception of looking up a little bit longer into the time horizon. It's about longevity of that word too. So, for example, McDonald's or Burger King, they're about speed and getting your takeaway fast and those type of things, and which kind of traded off a healthiness aspect. But as you can see, maybe there's a big health movement that's building and erupting, certainly over the last years, decade, whatever. And I think if you were to jump into that market now, it won't have as much longevity around it. If you were to somehow pick a word that had associations with, I don't know, fossil fuels or something, maybe that's going to run its course in just a few years. And so you need to pick something that's going to have a bit more length on it.
And I think now you need to pick more than a word. It's got to be a whole. Yeah, it's an identity. That's what the safety thing is for Volvo. It's their identity, I think.
Yeah, it's almost something that can continually keep evolving, and that is going to, if you keep evolving in that direction, the rest of the market doesn't just keep up with you. So now, probably one of the reasons that Volvo's shifted a bit is that it's almost expected across the entire car industry that everyone has, 5-star ANCAP rating or, the highest rating of all their cars. That's just what the consumer expects. as a minimum.
Yeah.
You know,
I think they've moved a bit more towards the environmental side. I think that they're really pushing harder than the other luxury cars into emissions reduction and this sort of stuff. That's still not like that's non-electric, but they've got pretty good hybrids that they're very expensive, but they're probably further along than what you'd see in their competitors being BMW and Mercedes and that sort of thing in that space.
So what you're saying is they've shifted into competing with like Tesla then, maybe.
Yeah, they're like the Tesla they're not really, Tesla's fully electric and tech focused, but I guess environmental is kind of what I'd call it.
Yeah.
It's still more of a traditional car. You don't have to take such a risk.
An environmental combustion engine. I love that.
Pretty much. Yeah. That's pretty much what it is. So yeah. Well,
I think you hit, mate, on the really important thing there with Volvo though, they were upfront and honest about it. You know? And that is the law of candor, which was just this next piece we had here, which is like, if there's an elephant in the room, call it out.
That's such a good way to put it. That pretty much summarizes the whole thing of this point. Own it. Own your rough edges.
Yeah, I didn't like how they called it the law of candor, actually, and so I changed it. I thought to change it to the law of calling out the elephant in the room, because there's certainly things like, if you're completely honest about, it's going to sound wrong, but if you're completely honest about the full spectrum of everything that goes on, to the extent that you're pointing out all the weaknesses and things of your product or brand, that's going to be detrimental, without a doubt. That everything is going to have problems. But instead of that, it's the widely known thing. So one example they use is the Beetle. Remember the VW Beetle, and the VW used that as, the 1970 VW will stay ugly for longer, because everyone knew it was ugly, everyone thought it was ugly, and they kind of embraced that.
Interesting.
But I think it gets overdone too.
Yeah, and it's like anything. These things, if everyone's doing it, it's not authentic, really, if you're just jumping on. So there's nuance, isn't there?
Yeah. Well, sometimes there won't be an elephant in the room for your product. Is probably the reality of it.
Yeah, and part of this is like, it's got a lot of humor in it. That stuff, those statements. So.
Yeah, which ties into the brand. If you're a very serious and very clinical type brand, maybe you don't want to have that humor element tied in. So consider that.
What are you going to do differently, mate? What's the takeaways?
I think something coalesced across the entire span of the book for me in this one, and it was around the idea of invest in tides, not waves.
That's nice.
Is what I'm coining it. They're
Another
very
principle.
hard. Yeah, I think we can add it to the principle list. It's growing. So they're very hard to notice, but the volume, like the actual volume of water carried, is far, far greater. So you don't notice the tide gradually creeping in across 6 hours, but it does. And with it, the volume of water, the entire ocean has shifted, as opposed to a few waves that have been crashing in. And so what it means is, because the magnitude's more, the movement's more, and so think of the water itself as being just how much energy and passion and momentum is behind your particular investment, whether that's a business, whether that's something else. So then the challenge is looking into how to actually spot them, and I think that's the big challenge.
Yeah, I like it. Invest in tides, not waves. Very cool. Well, mine's not as nice as that. I guess my main takeaway is to get really narrow, get specific about what you're offering, and get really narrow in your target, and then be willing to turn people away who don't fit that. So I think the biggest concept out of this for me was the positioning concept, and then understanding who you are and who you're for, and then tying that into things like line extension, and the other concepts in the book around focusing, what to sacrifice, and these sort of things. So positioning is for me.
You're going to take away the entire book by the sounds. You just rattled off every law in the book.
Well, I think I put it together pretty coherently. I mean, I didn't have a nice tagline like you, but let me summarize. I'm going to look into positioning more.
I love it. I think what you hit on is that just because you're sacrificing, elements of you or what your brand is, doesn't mean that you're sacrificing potential market or potential customers.
Let people know who you are.
That's good, mate. That's been a good round off.
That's the closing quote. Nice and short.
Boom.